At the circus, we once hired a clown who performed under the name Malingo. I think we all knew, right from the start, that there was something wrong with Malingo. And if you're considered odd amongst our ragged crew, there is something seriously wrong. He stank not only from the booze, which seemed to be his only intake of nutrient whatsoever, but of something sickly sweet, like a carcass left in the summer sun. And he moved rather clumsy, and not clown funny clumsy, but rigid, both on and off the stage. From day one, he kept to himself, and no one really cared to befriend him anyway. One night, he seemed more off than usual. He was mimicking the acrobats in one of his numbers. The idea was that he would use the trampoline and do a couple of flicks in the air, and then crash land. During the practice sessions, he had always gotten up right after the crash, since that was part of the act. But this night, in front of the audience, he didn't get up. I was the first one to reach him, since I'm always there during the clown's act. If the stench didn't tell me something were wrong, the huge gaping hole in his stomach did. It was like he had just burst open. Thankfully, I managed to get the clowns to play ambulance and carry him out before the audience realized it wasn't part of the show. I also managed to hide his wound with the help of a tablecloth that we had on stage. We have a doctor in our troupe, and after examining Malingo, he said that the clown had been dead for weeks. That last trick had been too much for his decomposing body, and he had simply burst. None of us understand how this can be, but he hid this condition, if one can call it that, under a mist of booze and thick layers of makeup. This reawoke the memory of a spooky childhood clown happening of mine. Unlike a lot of kids, I really liked clowns, even scary ones. Because of this, when I was about 9, my mom and dad hired a clown for my birthday party. When the party came, the clown came. His name was something like Polka Pete or something else. My memory is foggy because I was 9 at the time. I noticed immediately, he was really tall. Again, I was a kid at the time, but even according to my dad, he was a giant. And my dad's 6'4" for reference and works in construction. And Polka Pete was a whole head taller than him. Pete moved so weirdly. Again, even my parents remember it. It was like his arms and legs had additional knees and elbows. And his face was so uncanny. Even to a kid like me who loved clowns, he was uncanny. I didn't want to be around Pete, and my parents didn't want him around. My dad told him to his face to leave and offered to pay him bonus up front if he just left. Pete froze up at this, breathing heavily in my dad's face. My dad said it took him all the willpower in his body not to throw up in that moment, because Pete's breath was rancid. And then, a few moments later, a car covered in polka dots pulled up to the house, and an actual clown stepped out. Polka Pete suddenly stood up straight, getting this 1,000-yard stare in his eyes, before sprinting off really unnaturally. The actual clown was confused as fuck about why there was someone else there, and we all realized rather quickly that Polka Pete never showed up in a car. It seemed like he just materialized at the front door. Okay, a little backstory. I am a reptile enthusiast, and until recently, I bred, sold, and collected large pythons. In 2015, I joined a reptile expedition through the Amazon jungle, led by some of the world's top herpetologists, or reptile experts. It was a dream come true for me, and long story short, I went and had a blast. Some of the people I met there are still some of my closest friends to this day. I missed the expedition the following year, and I promised myself I would not miss the next one. So, 2017 comes around, I see the advertisement for the trip on Facebook, and boom, my credit card comes out, and I book a flight. The trek would start and end in a city in Peru called Iquitos, which you could only reach by boat or plane. There were 3 lodges we would be staying at on our way, with 1 night planned at the first lodge, 2 nights at the second, and 2 nights at the third. So the day I arrive, I get acquainted with everybody and check into my room. It was only meant to function as a place to sleep, since the point of the trip was to spend the whole day enjoying the wilderness of the Amazon. The layout of the rooms and the lodge is extremely important to the story, so let me explain it briefly. The rooms were all the same, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, and they were all arranged in a row. There were 13 total, just a long lodge of single rooms. No ceilings, just a big canopy that covered all of the rooms. The back wall near the head of the bed was actually only half a wall, with a curtain that covered the rest of the way up. Also, there were these stairs that came up out of the jungle, right up to the center of the lodge. Anyway, we mostly did our own exploring during the day, and since it was our first day, a bunch of people stayed out really late exploring. They didn't get back till 5 a.m., but by the end of the second night, even those of us that hadn't been out so late the previous day were pretty tired. I think we called it quits around 2 a.m. Now here is where shit starts to get weird. I don't know if this first thing has anything to do with what happened next, but as I was settling into bed, there was a persistent knock on the door to my room, and the person outside was calling me by my nickname. Nobody there knew me by that name, not even the guy leading the trip, who was a friend of mine. Since it was late and I didn't really want to get out of bed, I pretended to be asleep, ignoring the knocking until it went away. As I'm lying there, I realize that the curtain behind me on the half wall is kind of open. I get up to close it, but I take a moment to open it a bit, and I look out the jungle outside. As I'm looking, I suddenly get a feeling. I don't know if it was intuition or what, but it was like something was telling me, shut up, close the curtain, and get in bed. I don't know where that feeling came from, but I did just that, and within 5 minutes, I hear a mechanical beeping nearby. 3 beeps with an echo. Beep, echo, beep, echo, beep, echo. Right after that, I began to hear grunting. At first, I thought it was a really big animal, but as I listened, I realized I could make out at least 3 grunting to each other. Then one of them let out a reptilian-sounding hiss. The jungle is completely silent except for the sounds of these creatures. I'm thinking that there is no way anyone would be able to sleep through this. I don't really have a very good reference of time, but after maybe 30 minutes of listening to these things walk around outside, I hear another strange sound, kind of like an R2-D2 type sound, like a computer. But I hear that sound and it zooms right over my room, and I see that it's coming from some type of orb. It zooms all the way to the first room at the end of the lodge. I was in the 12th room, at the opposite end. So this thing goes over room 1, and I see that it shined a light straight into the room, like it was signaling that room. At that point, the whole lodge began to shake, and I heard something hurrying up the stairs, the ones that led up from the jungle to the lodge. Whatever it is, it sounds like it jumps over the wall into the room 1. Now, I'm freaked out. I start thinking in my head, how is this all going to turn out? I'm imagining the Channel 4 news report of a group of expeditioners going missing in the Amazon. I don't really know how much time passed. Maybe 10 minutes. Then, the sound and the orb move over room 2, and I hear the same thing as before. Something jumps into room 2. At this point, I start thinking about my mom, and what she's going to think if I die in the Amazon. I get out my notepad as quietly as I can, and I write her a letter saying that something is outside of the rooms, but I'm going to stay inside, and that if I end up going missing, it's because they came and took me. Anyways, this sequence happens maybe 4 or 5 times. When it gets to room 6, this time, the thing jumps in the room, and I don't know what caused it, but this thing gave out a loud shriek. I can only imagine what is going on, and what this thing looks like. I am sitting in my room in complete darkness, complete silence, with no defense, scared out of my mind. It's eventually going to get in my room. The orb gets to the room next to mine, and shines its light. I hear the thing jump the wall into the room, and after a minute, I hear my neighbor in her sleep let out a quick, sound. Then, almost as if she were made to feel comfortable or something, she sighs, oh. And that's all I heard. I know I'm next, and I feel completely helpless against whatever this thing is. The same way that earlier I had felt that shut up and get in bed feeling, I could feel now that it would be a bad idea to scream and make my non-cooperation known, so I stayed silent. The orb went over my room, but it did not signal. It must have seen that I was not asleep and moved past me to the last room. Then, suddenly, the guy that prepares our breakfast and stuff for the lodge turns on the generators so he can make breakfast. Right when he does this, I hear the same beeps as I did at the beginning of the experience, and all of the beings are gone. Then, everyone starts to wake up at the same exact time. Now, I'm wondering, when I go outside, are some of the people in the group going to be missing? Dead? Zombified? So, I step outside and go into the breakfast room, and most everyone is already in there, and they're just acting normal. Nobody else even realized anything had happened. I asked them all, and every single person said they slept through the whole night. In fact, out of everyone there, not one person got up to drink water. Not one person got up to go to the bathroom. Not one person snored. The next night, I heard these people doing all of those things. The only thing I can think of is that they had some sort of trance put on them to keep them asleep. And I somehow wasn't affected. Only one woman there said she woke up in the middle of the night and felt, quote-unquote, very dazed. She told me that she looked at their clock and it was 3 a.m., but that it looked like broad daylight through the curtain. Only she agreed that something strange took place. I have a story, and it's one that makes me think a lot of skinwalker encounters are bullshit. But not for the exact reason you might think. I do think skinwalkers are real, but what they are is much different than some Native American warlocks. I'll green text my encounter, and then I'll get into some finer details. Be me, 20. Year is 2009. On a camping trip in Ireland because I'm an outdoorsy type, and the Emerald Isle is gorgeous. Everything's mostly normal. I go to bed around 10 p.m. Have a dream that night. I'm standing in a grotto, naked. I can feel horns slowly protruding from my skull, through my forehead. Goat horns. It's not painful. Really feels kind of like a building tightness. A towering satyr-like figure walks out of the trees, surrounding the grotto. When I say walks out of the trees, I don't mean as in he emerged from between them. It was like he stepped right out of one of the trees. I immediately feel a sense of dread in his presence, like a kid sitting in the principal's office, waiting for the principal to come back. He huffs at me, kind of like a horse. Somehow, I understand his quote-unquote message. Transfers this knowledge to me, all at once, that his children are, or were, the changelings of old folklore. Tells me that they've become corrupted, and that I should leave the place I'm camping at, because his bastard children are around. His bastard children eat human flesh. Wake up in a daze. Usually my dreams are very foggy, but this one was, and still is, crystal clear in my memory. It's the very early morning, 4 a.m. or so. Sweating, even though it's quite chilly out. Light up the campfire again. Hear rustling from the forest around me. I shine my flashlight between the trees and bushes, and I don't see anything. I hear a young feminine voice call out to me from the woods. "Who are you? Why are you here?" I think it's just someone who lived near and I had accidentally camped on his land, or some kind of ranger. "Oh, I'm..." Immediately shut myself up because I remembered something I had learned, I think, on X recently at the time. "What was that? Go on." Girl shouts back. Notice her voice is slightly different. She had a faint Irish accent when she first called out. Now her voice had a southern twang. "I'm just camping here. I thought no one lived on this land." "What's your name?" She shouted back, angry, and with an entirely different voice. She sounded like my mom. What? I shut up and put out my campfire, grabbing my shit and my flashlight, briskly walk off the site that I was camping at, taking the same trail I followed the night before to get there. It is much, much longer than it was before. Feels like I've been walking for a few hours, but the sky hasn't changed at all. I'm getting goosebumps at this point, but I keep pushing on. I hear a female voice again, asking me what's my name. Sounds like it's right behind me. Spin around on my heel. Insanely tall figure standing behind me. So tall that I was about knee height with it. In the blink of an eye, it suddenly becomes a deer. Stares at me for a second. Hisses at me like a snake. And bares wolf-like teeth before bounding off into the woods. Frozen for a second, in complete shock. Blink again. Suddenly, it's much brighter out. And when I turn around, I'm just a few feet from my car. I had another dream much like the one with the Satyr Man, when I got back to the States. I can't remember it as vividly, but he told me that I encountered one of his bastard children, and now I'm marked. I had a few minor but related encounters afterwards. I had to move to a big city after getting back to the States for my job, and every time I leave the city to go back to the small town I grew up in to meet with family, I have weird as fuck encounters with wildlife, much like the deer with wolf teeth. An example that stands out in my memory was pulling over by the side of the road to check some text messages from my husband when I noticed there was a fawn standing partially behind a tree a short distance from my car. I stopped and stared at it for a second, and it walked out from behind the tree, fully. Its hind legs looked like those of a dog's, and it had a possum-like tail. It made a bizarre chattering noise at me before it sprinted off much faster than I've seen any fawn run before. I think that skinwalkers are a misinterpretation of something wrong that happened to the Fae. The Fae are already a malevolent force, and known to trick humans and cause misfortune. But based on the dream I had, and the mutated animals and what was probably a shapeshifter that I encountered, I have the hypothesis that skinwalkers are the Fae warped and turned far more malevolent and evil. Once creatures that merely like to prank people, now turned into monsters that feast on people. My house has always been creepy. Growing up, I had lots of unexplained experiences ever since the time I was 4. I live in rural Kentucky, one of those towns that relies solely on coal and is 5 years behind the rest of the world. In general, the whole town is still covered in thick woods that appear to have not been tampered with in hundreds of years. My house is placed right in the middle of the mountains, surrounded by an extreme amount of woods and even a couple of ponds. That gives you the setting for my home. This is where the real story begins. Growing up, I was never allowed to watch weird shows or movies like Ghost Hunters or The Exorcist because of all of the weird activity that went on in our house. Like I said, I experienced it all from an extremely young age, and so has my mom, who has lived in this house her whole life. However, one night my family made an exception, and we all watched a documentary about Waverly Hills together. At that age, I still slept in the room with my mom because I was so afraid of that house. That night, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the feeling of something watching me. I felt extremely uneasy. I rolled over to look around the room and my eyes locked onto something standing beside my mom. It was extremely tall but looked as if it had a broken back and it couldn't stand up completely. It was slouched over. Its skin was extremely pale and I could see the bones sticking out under the skin. It had long claws on both hands and its face was sunken in and its eyes were just black holes. It had no clothes, but also no genitals or nipples. I was horrified. I rolled over and covered myself up head to toe with the cover. I refused to move or look out the rest of the night, even though I was fully awake. Eventually, my mom woke up and she immediately started complaining of her side hurting. She raised her shirt, and we found huge claw marks down her side. It was 3 deep wounds which were extremely inflamed and still bleeding. I felt horrible, knowing that thing did that to her while I lay beside doing nothing. A couple months later, I saw that creature again, although it wasn't as horrible as the first experience. I woke up to the creature slouched on the floor on my side of the bed. It was watching me sleep. I covered myself up again immediately, but this time, I got the courage to peek out and found it still looking at me. I'm not sure when it went away because I didn't dare look again. I got chills, and my hair stood on end, even before seeing it for the first time. It had that feeling of complete evil to it. I'm 18 now, and obviously I sleep in my own room now. However, I still live in the same house. My mom still sleeps in the room where I witnessed this creature. Almost nightly, she has nightmares about something watching her. She has nightmares about something hiding in the paintings on her walls, or something coming from the ceiling in her room while she sleeps. There's one specific corner of the room where almost every dream seems to originate. Our cats refuse to stay in that room if the door is shut. If anyone has any information about any folklore that this could relate to, please tell me. I'm desperate for any information about what I've saw. I've had countless other experiences in this house, but those are the major ones. It has been many years since I have told anyone about my experience. I normally keep it to myself, as anyone I tell it to thinks I'm crazy. I don't blame them either. If someone told me this story, I would think they were a lunatic. Be me. Just got out of high school. Wanted to do something fun. I decided that I'll kayak through the Florida Everglades by myself. My mom hates the idea. My dad thinks I'll be fine. I had been camping, backpacking, and kayaking for about 7 years then, so I was fairly experienced in bushcraft. Ergo, like my dad, I thought I would be fine. And boy, was I wrong. As a precaution, my dad gives me my great-grandfather's old groundhog hunting rifle. My face when? My great-grandfather's groundhog rifle is a M1903 Springfield. Regardless, I grab my shit and rush off into the unknown. I decided to kayak around the Thousand Island portion of the Everglades. I pushed off at a small island known as Chokoloskee, and I made my way into the wild. I was ecstatic. Finally, I get to enjoy my favorite hobby with no one around to bother me. I camp at a small dinky campground known as Mormon Key. It was a 10+ mile kayaking trip to get there, plus part of that was just navigating through the mangroves. Needless to say, I was tired as fuck. Make camp, cook dinner, watch the sunset, and go to sleep. I wake up to howling in the distance. Sounds like a wolf. Problem is, wolves have been extinct in the Everglades since like 1910. Kinda weirded out, but there is a body of water between me and the howling, so I don't really dwell on it. I wake up, make up a quick breakfast, and continue heading south on my kayak. End up going down the Lost Man's River. See red circle and pick. Find a place down the river to camp. Set up camp, eat, and sleep. That would be my last comfortable night of sleep for the rest of the trip, and maybe the rest of my life. Wake up the next day refreshed, and head further down the river. Eventually, hit the mainland. I walk about 1.5 miles east before I decide to turn back. That was a mistake. I tripped, fell, hit my head, and knocked myself out. Fuck me. I wake up about 2 hours later. I pick myself up, orient myself, and start heading back towards the kayak. I get to where the kayak was, and it was gone. The rope is still tied to a mangrove, but the middle is chewed through. It finally hits me. The kayak is fucking gone. My tent, most of my food, water, other gear, and most importantly, my transportation is all gone. I decide to get to dry land, as I don't want to be in the mangroves at night. I get to dry land, eat a granola bar, and decide to head northeast in the morning to try and get help. I fall asleep with my head on my pack and next to a fire. I wake up, only 4 hours later, to the noise of howling. Wolf howling. Once again, baffled, seeing as they should be extinct around here. I shine my light into the brush. I see an absolutely gargantuan wolf, bigger than I've ever seen. Think the size of a rhinoceros. I flip the fuck out and add what little dry wood I have to the fire. I spend the night clutching my rifle next to a dying fire. They eventually fuck off, but I don't let down my guard. Around sunrise, I immediately head northeast. I'm tired, hungry, thirsty, and I just want to get help. I'm slowly trudging through knee-high water. I consider ditching the rifle to get rid of weight, but then I remember those wolves. I keep going on and on, mindlessly, checking every 10 minutes or so to make sure I'm on course. In the middle of these mangroves is a small dry area. I figured that I could rest here for a short while. I walk into the clearing, and I see a structure. It's a pyramid in the fucking Everglades. Think pick related, but smaller. I am dumbfounded at what a pyramid would be doing this far out here. I didn't think that the local tribes ever got this advanced. I needed to keep moving, but I just found a hidden pyramid in the middle of the Everglades. Archaeologists and historians would kill to find this. I figure I need to stop and at least look at the place. I climb up to the top, and there's a pit. Just a dark pit. Out of the pit, I can hear something faint. I get down on all fours so I can hear it better. I realize that there is wailing coming from the pit. Grief-filled, painful wailing. I promptly get up and try to get the fuck out of there. In a rush, I trip, see a pattern, and after tripping, the wailing turns to straight-up screaming. It sounds like a fucking banshee. I'm convinced that anyone within 10 miles could have heard that shit. It was deafening. I started hurrying back down when I see those damn dogs. There was a pack of 5 of them, all completely fucking huge. I drop my pack and climb up a cypress tree. I fire all 5 of my rounds into the biggest fucker there. He bleeds out under the tree, while the screaming from the pyramid is just getting louder and louder. The pack drags away the dead dog into the mangroves. I take my opportunity and jump down and start booking it northeast. I left my pack to save weight, and I'm going through the mangroves as fast as I possibly can. I even throw aside the rifle, as I have no ammo for it, and it is just dead weight. Eventually, after an hour, I can't hear the screaming anymore. I'm dehydrated as fuck and hungry, but I keep moving forward. I find myself on a road, loop road scenic drive, with a bunch of police cars. They hesitate when they see me because I look like I've been through hell and back. They get me water and a granola bar and tell me to sit tight for an ambulance. When I ask how they knew to find me, they said some guy on the road called in about hearing incessant shooting a couple hours prior, and they had been searching since. I get to the hospital, and the police interrogate me. I hesitate and tell them that I got lost and fired those shots at an alligator. They accept it, and they leave me alone. My family comes up in hysterics to see me. I confide in my dad about what actually happened. Naturally, he doesn't believe me, and said that the dehydration must have made me hallucinate it. I go home, and I keep bringing it up. Eventually, he has me admitted to a psychiatrist for delusions and hallucinations. Gee, thanks, Dad. I've brought the story up to 2 different people, and both had the same response. I'm never going back to that place again, and I just want to forget about this. But I felt like I needed to tell someone. I don't care if you believe me or not, as no one else does. I just needed to get it out. I don't know what I found out there, and it will probably stay that way. Good night, Axe. I'm going to bed. Sister moves into this downstairs Victorian-era flat. Due to the layout, it doesn't get any natural light, so you always need the lights on, no matter what time of day it is. This adds to the eeriness because artificial light. Has 2 kids, boy and girl. Boy is 4, girl is 6. She's just moved in, so I go over to see her and check the place out. Just her and her son home. He's playing in the hallway in front of this full-length mirror that I've always hated. Ask him how it's going. He's cool. Have this conversation through the mirror, like we're looking at each other's reflections when we're talking. See his eyes shift slightly to the side, and like he's concentrating on what's being said. Except I'm not talking. Bursts out laughing. Ask what he's laughing at. Ignores me and says, "No, that's my Uncle Anon." Who are you talking to? Simon. Simon? The fuck is Simon? Yeah, you get yours too. Runs off to get his toy cars. Goes sit in living room with sister. Not sure how to approach this subject. Cut to the chase and tell her I'm worried nephew might be retarded. I mean, he's like 4 and can't even pass the mirror test. Asks me if I'm talking about that because of him talking to Simon. She explains that he does it all of the time. He just sits in front of the mirror and plays with Simon. Ask her if she knows that he knows it's his own reflection. She tells me she thought that too, but she got him to describe Simon, and he absolutely did not describe himself. Throughout all of this, you can still hear him having a one-way conversation and laughing. Toilet is in the hallway, so I go and use it. Come out, and he's playing with his toy cars, but not looking in the mirror anymore. Fire truck is behind him. Starts moving on its own. Huh, must be a draft, even though there is no draft. That spooked me as it was, but the second and only other thing that I experienced there really put the shits up me. Might as well do that one too. Sister and her boyfriend are going away, just for the night. Asks me and girlfriend to look after the kids. Say sure. Son won't be there. It'll just be daughter and her cousin, girl, around the same age. So, both about 6. Girl stay in sister's bed and me and girlfriend stay in kids' room. That way they can't get up in the middle of the night to play with any toys or things and they'll just go to sleep. I hate the kids' room because there's no door on it, and it faces straight down the hallway to the front door. Worse is that the bed faces the doorway, so I have the front door at one end, and the kids' door on the other, and then about halfway down the hallway, you have sister's bedroom door, and opposite is the bathroom door. Nothing happens anyway, and we're all in bed by this time, early hours of the morning. Go to the bathroom, come out, and I go to check on the girls. Put ear to door, hear girls giggling and talking, then hear this raspy as fuck old woman's voice, and more giggling. Fuck this. Go get girlfriend. Tell her girls are awake and she should tell them to go back to sleep. Bit of an argument where she says I should because I'm family, but I press her to do it with her being a girl, And them being girls. She knows how to talk to them and etc. Gets up and goes over to the bedroom. See her face change as she listens. Comes rushing back and says she can hear someone in there with them. That was what I was dreading. I was hoping I had just imagined it in my sleepy state. Both of us go to the bedroom door. Can still hear that raspy voice and giggling. Burst in like a madman and switch the light on. Pure silence. Girls are fast asleep. Stay awake for the rest of the night, too scared to go back to sleep. It might not sound scary, but honestly, it really caught me out. Old people and kids always freak me out anyway if it's X-related. I think it's because I know I could 1v1 them IRL, but when it's the supernatural, who knows what X powers they might have. I have one possibly paranormal experience of my own. It's kind of shit, but lately I've been thinking about it a lot, so I feel compelled to share it. Bougie friend is celebrating his birthday. Lots of hipsters, theater actors, and art hoes. I'm anxious and sticking out like a sore thumb, so I get to drinking very quickly and very hard. People keep coming in and out, all have the same look to them. Expensive clothes, immaculate hair, etc. Keep seeing this one girl who is worse off than I am. Feel a bit better about myself. She's just wearing sweatpants and a faded band t-shirt. Needs to dye her hair. Roots are coming in very hard. Figure she's a drug dealer since there's coke and weed going around. And she really doesn't look like she came to party, or like she's in with the crowd. I am completely trashed. She's sitting next to me, telling me that I should stop drinking and go vomit. She keeps insisting that I go to the bathroom and vomit. Yeah, I guess I feel pretty sick. Go to the bathroom, close the door behind me. As I'm puking, I see that she's kneeling next to me, has a hand on my shoulder. Don't remember her coming in, but whatever. Get it all out, she says. Some hours pass. I keep drinking, pass out in a bed. She's lying next to me. Again, I didn't notice her come in. She's instructing me to sleep on my side. Fine. Turn away from her. A few days later, ask a friend about her. Figure I should thank her because she nannied me pretty much all night. He says there wasn't anyone like that at his party. Figure she's a party crasher my friend doesn't know and didn't notice. Years later, friend is selling his apartment. Jokingly asks if he should report the death that happened there. What? Before he moved in, a heroin junkie lived there. A young woman. She choked to death on her own vomit while high. Apparently, she died in the room I passed out in. TLDR, ghost might have saved me from meeting the same end she did. Alright, I feel a little silly even writing it down, but here we go. My supernatural encounter. Be me, 17. Dad loves to hunt. Always go with him. We've had a real bad string of not getting drawn. After another year of not getting drawn, Dad just buys some expensive tickets to hunt on local res. Kind of a splurge, but it was on my dad, and he could afford it. Super beautiful land. Keep spotting deer all over. No elk. Only got tags for elk. I'm okay with it. My favorite part of hunting is just walking around and spending time with my dad. He was a surgeon when I was a kid, so I spent a lot of my childhood not really knowing who he was. Really just came home to eat or sleep. Anyway, we walk around all week, and it runs me ragged. We get to a nice meadow one day, and my dad says he's gonna take a nap in the shade. Tells me to keep an eye on the meadow. Elk wander into them all the time. Just chilling out in the beauty when I see some movement. Peek at it through my scope. Just another herd of deer. Take my finger off of the trigger. I know, I shouldn't have even put it on the trigger before I knew what I was looking at. I'm safer now. And I just watch him through the scope. A few minutes later, deer scatter. Just fucking bolt. Absolutely terrified. Weird, but neat. Maybe another predator is nearby. Not too worried. My gun is honestly stupidly big, even for elk. Mostly just curious. Wait to see more movement. Eventually, I see something move across the clearing. Look through scope at it. It's just another deer. Looks a little bit funny, but not like Fallout bad. Just a little gangly. Moves a little funny too. Deer are real graceful. This thing just kind of bumbles. Honestly just assumed it was real young or something. It walks a little more into the clearing, then stops. Looks directly at me through the scope. Already a little bit weird. I'm a good 400 meters out, and in the shade. It shouldn't be able to see me, and it shouldn't be able to catch any lens glare. Deer rears back on its hind legs. and the front legs just like twist. I've seen deer on their hind legs before, but they can't put their front legs at their sides like humans can. This fucking thing does. Posture still isn't human because deer don't have a center of weight like that, but it can put its fucking hooves at its side, and it just stands and looks at me. Then it bolts across the clearing. Even then, it's on 2 legs. Even though it looks ridiculous, it's moving way faster than normal deer. If I had to eyeball it, I would say this freak hit 30-ish. Get a long period to look at it, 20 seconds at least. Got that super forward-leaning sprint of sprinters, but it's a deer on 2 legs. It's not moving towards me, it's just headed across the clearing. Don't know why I didn't shoot it. I think part of my brain was still worried about the elk versus deer tag thing. Sounds really dumb saying it out loud, but I wasn't really worried. I was just baffled and kind of grossed out. After it's gone, tell my dad about it. He thinks I must have hallucinated it. I had only slept about 4 hours a night for the last 3 nights. I was a major insomniac in high school, and sleeping anywhere but my house made it a lot worse. We walk out to the meadow to look for footprints. All we find is the pair of prints from where I saw it, on 4 legs. Nothing from the 2-legged stage. Only weird detail is that the areas that it went through had a weird smell that both me and my dad noticed. Like old pennies and bleach. It was weird. I'm an atheist, so I generally don't put a lot of stock into the supernatural. But I gotta admit, that night shook me up. Weird shit. Got some OC spooks to share with you, Anons. Be me, 15-year-old vegan friend at the time, learning how to forage with help from my dad. We're on a hike into the woods. I'm carrying our duffel bag, which currently just has some spring onions in it, talking with Dad when, all of a sudden, he hushes me. What? He tells me he smells something. I take a big long sniff myself, and all I smell is onion and a weird smell like a burning pine needle. The fuck? Definitely not any forest fires around. He starts walking off the trail and I follow him. Why are we off the trail, Dad? I heard from a friend that if you smell that smell, there's wild saffron around. Okay, Pa. We absolutely do not live anywhere near saffron grows, and I don't buy Dad's bullshit. He stops and starts looking around, and I do too. Find this weird looking plant. Looks like a solid green tennis ball on a stalk. Poke it, unfurls, and it takes me a second to realize what was inside of the flower. It fucking blinks at me. My face when it's a fucking human eyeball. Completely gripped by some supernatural terror. Scream. Dad shoots around, sees it too, and is petrified. Before I realize what's happening, he grabs my wrist and we sprint home delirious. Memory cuts out sometime around when we started running away. Next memory is just us sitting on the porch together. Dad remembers it too. Still what the fuck over it to this day. Any Anons in this thread have stories about chairs in the woods? Not stairs, but chairs. They're somewhat common around where I live. I've never seen a staircase randomly in the wilderness, but I have seen a lot of things like pick related. The one unifying factors with every time I've seen a chair were, number 1, the sounds of the woods, the wind, etc. would completely go out when I was near it. Number 2, the chairs were never damaged and clearly abandoned. They always looked new. And number 3, the chairs were always brightly colored and in contrast to the woods around them. For example, in the fall, the chairs would be green. In the summer, the chairs would be orange. In winter, the chairs would be black. Is some schizo in my area fucking with me, or is this some actual paranormal happening? The only story I really have of interacting with one of these chairs was throwing a rock at one when I was about 13. A few hours afterwards, when I was home, a rock was thrown back through my window. It spooked the shit out of me, and I was really close to the window at my desk, but I didn't see anyone or anything throw the rock. Yeah, but I think they're used mainly by kids hanging around, or homeless people. I even have 2 stories involving them, albeit one was a chair we brought ourselves, so it doesn't really count. The other one was a bit weirder though, although not strictly in the woods. Have a housing estate built in the 1960s that's in the oddest place. Has no shops or local amenities nearby because it's built in the middle of a trading estate. Sometime in the 1990s, they discover something in the soil has cancer-causing properties, and the big factories nearby don't help. So they decided to demolish it around 1999. Now it's just this big bit of land that still has all of the roads and footpaths, the streetlights, which are never turned on, and even some of the old fences from people's properties still erected. Other than that though, it's just grass full of rubble. Walk dog there because it's out of the way, and you can do a lap around the old streets. This particular road loops around a big patch of grass full of trees. Don't know if they were back gardens or if it was always grass and trees. There definitely wasn't houses where the trees are because, well, the trees couldn't grow that fast. They're like these big 50-foot things. Pass by with dog who stops and starts sniffing at the edge, then growling. Normally really placid. Could be rats. Take a look. About a foot in from the edge, there's a broken paving stone. In fact, there's a bunch of them that someone has put together to make a little path. Walk down it. Leads to a tree surrounded by bushes, but the bushes have an opening in them, like a fox den, but big enough for a person to get inside. One single couch chair against a tree trunk. Sit in it, can see the entire road and everything through these little openings that have been made in the bushes. Come back out. You would never know it was there from the road. I think it was some homeless person using it like a lookout. It was still really weird though. Huh, I have something that might be related to this. There's a local legend around where I live. You're supposed to go out to this one cemetery at night, sit in one of the benches. If you wait long enough, you'll see the devil or something. Friend and I go to do this years back. We didn't believe it, of course, but it was Halloween, and we had nothing else going on. As we're waiting in the dark, we hear someone walking through the trees towards us. Oh no, it's the devil. Seriously though, it was kind of scary. Turned out to be a hobo. Guy looked severely unkempt and legit crazy. Had the wild eyes, reeked of booze. His teeth were all rotted out, and he was talking to us way too fucking loud. Started to think the cops might show up, so I tell my friend, come on, let's go. Hobo asks if we're here to see the devil. He tells us there's a haunted chair in the woods that really works. It's in a little forest nearby that we have to pass to get home. So we thank the guy and take off because we are eager to leave the crazy fucker. But we stop by the little forest, like idiots. Could have easily been some hobo trap or something, but oh well, in we go. The hobo had told us that there were marks on the trees leading the way, and sure enough, there were. They were in some sort of hobo code or something, little squares and circles and stuff. Anyway, to make a long story short, we find two bodies. Two guys about our age, one heaped over the other, face down in the leaves. Nearby was a chair that looked totally out of place, looked new, and had gold trim, bright green. Realized the whole place is suddenly fucking quiet. Not even a breeze, despite it being Halloween. For some reason, we both back away slowly instead of hightailing it out of there, until we can't see the chair anymore. Then, race to the car and head home. Went back later. No chair, no bodies, and the markings on the trees had been scratched out with a knife or something. Well, I live in Montreal for starters. I live on the West Island in Pierrefonds with my girlfriend. The past 2 years, I've been attending college and working at some shitty cafe. Dealing with the shitty customers finally got to me, so I quit my job at the cafe and started looking for a different job. Preferable one where I wouldn't have to deal with assholes constantly. It got to the point where nobody was hiring and I desperately needed money for rent, school, and doing shit socially. I was talking to my best friend about me having a hard time financially, and he told me that if I helped him do this thing, he would split the profit with me. Well, I'm not sure what, but my friend's father had something to do with property. Mostly commercial. Stores, factories, and shit. No homes or anything. What my friend would do is look through his dad's work shit and find out the addresses of these closed down places, what their purpose was, how long ago they closed down, and etc. He had some sort of personal evaluation process, where he would consider whether or not a place was worth looting, and if it was a good time to do so. I went with him to a couple of places to salvage what we could, and sell it to anyone willing to buy it. There were some pretty valuable finds. It's shocking what people will leave behind. Anyway, things were going well. I was making a decent amount of money doing the occasional quote-unquote job with him, and one day, he finds out about this place between Montreal and Toronto. He drives us over there, and the place looks really fucking scummy. He said it had only been abandoned a year before, but the paint was peeling, there was trash everywhere, and it smelled like piss. We had arrived at around 6 p.m. I guess. Not too early, not too late. A perfect time for Time 6 to upload. And to this day, I'm not sure what the place was. Might have been some sort of refinery or waste management center. Or something, because the main reason we were there was to strip the piping. Lots of copper in places like that. And if you get enough of it, it can lead to a decent sum of cash. Well, we take shift waiting outside near my friend's 4x4 pickup, and going inside to strip shit that looks valuable. We'd been there around 2 hours, and we were almost done looking through the place. It was my turn to wait on lookout while my friend cleared out the last of the shithole. It's been about 2 hours at this point, and it was getting dark. My friend sends me a text, saying something along the lines of, "This shit's weird. Park the truck behind the bushes and get over here. Bring something just in case." I assumed he meant bring something in a weapon capacity, so I brought along 2 of the cleaner, smaller pipes and headed to the back of the building. My friend gestures for me to come over, and he looks visibly freaked the fuck out, which is rare because he's normally very level-headed. The last room had around 3 tents set up in it. It smelled like ass, and there were stains fucking everywhere. From the looks of it, it might have been piss, shit, vomit, and some even looked like aged bloodstains. There were what looked like family photos everywhere, but of different families, not just different photos of the same one. Needless to say, we were pretty on edge at that point, but nobody was there, and we were armed up, so we thought we would just look through the tents and get the fuck out. 2 of the tents were repulsive on the inside, but nothing was too bad. The one to the far left, on the other hand, was fucking full of dead animals. The majority of them were cats, mostly strays, but a few of them had collars. There were at least 10 in there, minimum. At that point, it became too much, and we just went to leave. But Dennis saw one more spot he wanted to check out. There was an office near the entrance that was boarded up, and there was a bunch of office shit in there that looked mostly intact. Supplies, a small filing cabinet, a computer to monitor. Wishful thinking because it didn't fucking work anyway. I was really anxious to leave because I was pretty spooked, so I told my friend to go and start up the car. I would search the office and bring the stuff around back. Seeing as I couldn't use the door, I figured I'd break the window. The place was already busted anyway, so I didn't feel too bad about it. I head into the office, and I shit you guys not, there was a fucking dead guy slumped in the corner of the room. I couldn't see him because he was right behind a door that was blocked up. I'm not big into forensics or any of that shit, but he looked like he had been killed a couple of months back. What really freaked me out was that the door was boarded shut from the outside. I'm the one that just broke the window then, and there was a fucking dead guy in there. That must have meant that someone killed him in there, left him, and nailed the door shut with a bunch of scrap wood. Or maybe he killed himself. I don't fucking know. The point is, he didn't lock himself in there. I couldn't take anymore. I sprinted to the car like a little bitch. Threw up in the bushes. Didn't want to do it near the body. I don't know if they can get DNA from that shit or whatever. Worst part is, neither of us called it in, because our fingerprints are all over that place. I know it sounds like horse shit, but it actually happened. It's probably the only too spooky for me thing that'll ever happen in my life, though. Jail was unironically very spooky for me. In jail for 2 weeks. Cellmate was local bong shop owner, and former Hell's Angel. Went to jail for fighting a bunch of cops at once. Talked about how he was a clone. Talked about how he went to Jamaica once, and met Mila Kunis's clone. Talked about being an intelligence asset. Talked about how power structures at the elite level are both good and evil. Talked about wanting to find and kill the original him after he gets released. Talked about he can fly and walk through walls when he undergoes unspecified and highly classified zone therapy by his intelligence handlers. Talked about needing to forfeit his hand to his handlers so they can clone him. Talked about wanting to kill his handlers because he knows once he himself gets cloned, his clone will be instructed to find and kill him. Said he didn't know how long this had been going on for. Man, that is just some of the fucked up shit he would get into. That's just the stuff I remember. Oh yeah, says his daughter married into Italian mafia and was murdered after he got cloned. Says his mom tried to kill him numerous times. Holy fuck, I just googled him out of curiosity, and it turns out he's fucking dead. What a trip. Anyway, jail is a totally spooky place, Anon. Lots of schizos, weirdos, and scary motherfuckers. You can either grow from it or not. Most don't and just dwell. I realized my relationship with all things was better when I was out. Isolation makes you appreciate the little things again. The car ride out of your tower to court, seeing the trees and open sky, cars, innocents going about their day. Your cell becomes a place of meditation. You read, you write, you sit and think, you exercise, and do yoga. Sober, just enough food to not die, so you're fasting. It's a wonderful mental reset. I used to think the system is designed to keep certain souls down, but then I learned it's a place to put a soul that's basically in timeout, and certain ones don't want to learn and grow from it, so they end up back there. It does break your spirit though. Not your spirituality, but your sense of wonder and lightheartedness is just so put to halt for so long. Learning to be truly calm takes a while. Being homeless for a week or so after during late summer was super easy, but part of my journey. I was finally with the trees and with the open sky. I could sleep under the stars at a park that was super safe near the burbs. Go and get a coffee and a burger in the morning. Roam around with my dog who just thought we were on a never-ending walk. And loving the attention from strangers. Being reunited with a pet was monumental. It really mentally resets your gratefulness. If even 2 months of jail doesn't give you enough time to rethink priorities and your focus, and to align your mind and soul, then I honestly don't know what to tell you to do. Let me preface this story by telling you that it's been a long time since this happened. While it is a true story, I've had to add some details to make the story flow in a somewhat coherent fashion because I don't remember absolutely everything that happened. Also, my sequence of events may be a little fucked up, but that doesn't change the fact that some of these images are still absolutely frozen in my mind. I was hoping my old retelling was still around because it came out pretty coherent. Anyhow, when I was somewhere around 8 to 10 years old, I went camping with my Girl Scout troop. There were about 12 to 15 of us girls and 2 female leaders. The camp had 6 of those permanent tents, wooden platform with canvas covering and bunks. 3 to 4 were facing the main part of the camp. 2 were set back a bit in the woods behind the picnic shelter. Behind those 2 tents was a path that led to the latrines. On the first day, we all picked out our sleeping spots, and our tent was 1 girl short. We spent the rest of the afternoon and evening doing typical Girl Scout stuff, and we spent the evening around the fire, singing and eating marshmallows. The counselors finally made us go to bed around 10 p.m., and when we got to our tent, we used our flashlights to find our bunks and get settled in. It was around this time that we noticed that someone was sleeping in what had been the empty bunk. We didn't think much of this, as it wasn't really unusual for someone to arrive at camp later than the main group, and some of the girls had gone back to the tents before the fire time was over because they were tired. I was a total insomniac, and it's even worse if I'm not in my own bed. This was true even back then. I tossed and turned trying to force myself to fall asleep that night, but it just wasn't happening. After doing this for over an hour, I heard the springs of one of the other beds squeak like someone was getting up. I turned my head to see someone standing up from that previously empty cot. In the very low light, I could just make out the figure of someone standing, pausing for a moment, and then moving toward the front entrance of the tent. The person opened the flap and left the tent. I figured that somebody just needed to go to the bathroom. I still couldn't sleep, so I figured I would wait and see if I could tell who the girl was when she got back. I waited and waited, but it finally drifted off to sleep before the girl came back. When we woke the next morning, we discovered that the bed was empty, and there were no blankets or suitcases near the bed. We talked to the other girls to try to figure out who had been in our tent, but we found out that nobody had come in late, and nobody was missing from their tents. Still, there was always a chance that one of the girls got pissed off at the other girls in their tent and decided to switch for the night. That shit always happens with girls. That night, we spent a long time around the campfire again. At some point during the evening, one of the girls stands up and starts walking towards the woods. The tents and shelter were in the opposite direction. As she got close to the tree line, one of the counselors called out to her to see what the heck she was doing, but she just kept walking straight into the woods. The counselor called to her another time and then went after her. The other counselor did a head count to try to figure out who was missing. When she got to the end, she stared at us and started counting again. The other counselor came back saying she couldn't see where the girl had gone and she needed a bigger flashlight. When she asked who was missing, the counselor who had been trying to count us said, "Nobody." The counselors even pulled out the roster to check us off, but we were all right there. We were all a little shaken up, so the counselors decided it was time for us to get to the bathrooms and get to bed. Everybody was a little creeped out, so we all went as a group to the bathroom. I washed up and brushed my teeth first. There was a large trough-style sink outside of the actual bathroom, so I was one of the last to actually go to the toilets. And as I was in there, I heard someone moving around in the stall next to me. I'd said something to her, like asking for toilet paper, who knows, but she didn't answer me. I said hello twice, but I still got no answer. When I finished, I knocked on the other stall door, but nobody answered even though I could still hear noises inside, and the door was locked. I went out and told one of the counselors who went back in with me to check it out. When we went in, the door was unlocked, and there was nobody in there. There was no other way out of the bathroom besides the front entrance that I was standing no more than 2 feet from when I was talking to the counselor. The girls that were in the tents that were kind of separated from the others were a little freaked out, and they didn't want to sleep out there, but since they were right next to the counselor's tent, they were reassured and sent to bed. When we reached our tent, we saw again that there was someone in the spare bunk. This time, we figured one of the girls from the far tent had snuck over in spite of what the counselors had said. And, really, do you think any of us had enough balls to lift a blanket off of that bed? We settled in for the night, and I was wishing that I could fall asleep so that I didn't have to be awake alone. Soon enough, I could hear the snores of the other girls, and I was still staring at the ceiling of that tent. Soon enough, I heard the springs of one of the beds squeak again. I opened my eyes and stared at what was supposed to be our vacant cot. There was someone standing up again. I could just make out the figure standing there in the dark. It stood there for about 30 seconds this time, before it moved across the tent and out the flaps. Needless to say, I was pretty much shitting myself, but I was too scared to scream for a counselor because I was afraid that whatever it was would come back. I laid awake for what seemed like hours, staring at that tent flap, hoping that it wouldn't open again. I must have fallen asleep at some point because the next thing I remember, it was morning. Again, the cot was empty. This time, I told the counselors what I had seen, and they asked the girls at breakfast who had been in our tent, but none of the girls admitted to being there. All of the girls in my tent had seen the figure on the cot both nights, but I was the only one who had seen it leave. That day was pretty sedate because everyone was a bit on edge, but we eventually relaxed because of the bright sunshine and fun activities. In order to keep our minds off of that evening, the counselors planned for us to have a bunch of snacks and games around the campfire that night. We had stuff for the little hand pies, banana boats, s'mores, and cinnamon apples. We were all planning on making absolute pigs out of ourselves. The counselors set up all the goodies in the picnic shelter, which was 30 or 40 feet from the campfire ring. The girls would go over and set up their snack and bring it back to the fire to cook it. When I went over, there were a few girls finishing up their snacks, and they left before I had finished up making my banana boat. As I was adding my chocolate chips, there was a huge bang, like a gunshot in the woods, and it was followed by yells that seemed to be coming from different directions. I dropped my snack and went running over to the fire. Everyone had heard it, and some of the girls were near tears. As we sat there, we heard more noises and yells from the woods. The fire was in the middle of a clearing surrounded by woods, and it was an awful feeling to realize how exposed we were, and that anybody could be out in the woods watching us. Instead of going to the latrines that night, a lot of the girls just peed behind the tents, and the girls that were in the far tent were moved into our tents. In fact, we consolidated into 2 or 3 tents by adding cots, and the counselors slept in the 4th tent. We were packed in like sardines, but everyone would sleep easier with more people nearby. We also propped up one of the flashlights on the floor to illuminate the tent as we slept. I actually fell asleep pretty quickly that night because I had had 2 sleepless nights before, but I ended up waking up at some point in the night because of some noises. I opened my eyes, but I found that the tent was now dark. It seemed that the flashlight had died at some point, and as I managed to get my bearings, I realized that the noise I was hearing was the sound of someone getting up out of one of the cots. I nearly stopped breathing as I watched a figure stand. I had to shift my head this time to get a better look. It stood in one place even longer this time, and I couldn't stop watching. It seemed to be leaning over and looking at some of the other girls, and it started to make its way between the cots towards the front flaps. As it neared my cot, I snapped my eyes shut and tried to slow my breathing, pretending I was sleeping. I could hear it come even with my bed, and it stood there for a long time. I presume it was staring at me, but I wasn't about to open my eyes and find out. Eventually, it moved past me, and I heard the sound of the tent flap being opened. I still kept my eyes shut because I was so afraid that it was trying to trick me. That's when I heard the most god-awful noise I've ever heard. One of the posters in the other thread posted a video of cats talking, and I have to say, that was pretty accurate, but it was much louder. It didn't sound like a human or an animal. The sound seemed to be coming from outside of our tent, but nearby. But all of a sudden, the girls in the next tent started screaming like they were being murdered. Of course, our tent responded in kind, and all of our flashlights were switched on in rapid succession. We could hear the other girls still screaming and running out of their tent. We all stumbled out of our tent to see what the hell was going on. By the time we made it out, most of those girls were near the fire pit, and the counselors were headed for them. From what the other girls were able to relate, they heard the horrible noise outside, and that's when they saw someone, or something, enter their tent. In all of the confusion, nobody saw exactly what had entered, but they had seen the figure open the tent flap. The counselors tried to console the girls, and the one that was particularly brave took a flashlight and headed toward the tent. She searched the tent, but she couldn't find anyone, or anything. We spent the rest of the night all jammed in a group near the fire, and not a single one of us got any sleep. The next morning, we decided to pack up and leave early after one of the counselors discovered that the door to the dining hall had been opened and things had been moved around. Nobody but the counselors had access to the dining hall, and the doors had been padlocked the night before. New Mexican here. Just about everyone I know has seen something fucking weird. My mom and stepdad used to live on the outskirts of Valencia in a piece of shit hut. One day they were out there walking around through a bit of forest, heading home from the store. They lived very far away from the town proper, but were poor as fuck and would cut any corners they could, including gas. The forest in that area was fucking creepy. It was pretty similar to the bosque that surrounds the Rio Grande, since the way home was along an irrigation ditch. It was pretty dark at this point, and they never went out late, but I guess they cut it too short. About half a mile away from their house, they saw this fucking weird creature walking along the opposite side of the ditch. My mom says that it looked like an enormous albino deer, like the size of a really big moose. She told me that its legs were moving at really creepy and unnatural angles. She also said that its fave area looked kind of flat, like it didn't have a muzzle. It had a face that almost looked like an alien's, and its eyes were glowing red. She and my stepdad both froze when they saw it, and watched it walk out for a few seconds before it noticed them and immediately fled into the forest. They pretty much bolted home after that. I think that creature may have been a skinwalker, but who the hell knows? My friend told me that one time he and his bud were walking down a ditch late at night in Bosque Farms, and that they saw what looked like a black mountain lion leap out of an empty ditch, and it shapeshifted into a regular-sized house cat mid-flight. It fled into the forest. One time, I was walking my dog in the bosque. I stumped upon this weird-ass structure made of wooden sticks. This isn't unusual in the bosque. A lot of homeless people and campers build them as shelter, but this one was enormous, like the size of an actual house. I walked up to it and tried looking inside of it, but it was pitch black in there. The entrance was a somewhat small hole. A child might have been able to walk in by ducking down, but an adult would have to crawl in on all fours. As I was bending down to inspect it, I suddenly heard a female voice whisper something into my left ear, crystal clear. I couldn't understand her, but whatever she said, it was definitely not English. My heart fucking dropped, and I felt a sense of dread like I have never before. I felt like I was about to die, and that I was in immediate danger. My dog's tail was completely between his legs, and as I turned and sort of speed walked away, he tugged on his leash as hard as he could, making a beeline out of the bosque. I felt like something sinister was watching me the whole time. Even as I exited the bosque, it felt like there were some very evil presence being left behind. I recently talked to a Native American girl at my school, and she mentioned to me that she spoke Tiwa. I asked her to say a few things for me, and now I'm completely convinced that that's the same language that mystery voice spoke to me in. Man hears a foreign language and goes, yeah, that's the ghost, man. That's what it was. Bada boom, bada bing. I found a fucking witch hut, and then this girl at school spoke to me in a weird language. That has to be it. I've never heard of any other language ever in my whole entire fucking life. German? No, it's witch hut language.